This is what we're going to do this week. We're going to study what we left off last week, plus these topics. Now, this is a very pretty loaded amount of work. Normally, in my regular JavaScript course, I would spend probably a week just on loops, function, and scope alone. Now you have a lot more. So we'll try our best to see if we can finish them. If not, they will be continued in the following week. Okay. As far as your learning objectives for studying these topics go, you have loops, function, scope, global object, arrays, as well as objects. Map is considered part of the object. Array is also an object. So everything is an object in JavaScript. By and large, you should do two things. One is to understand what these things are, right? These topics, what they're used for. And also, I would recommend that you have plenty of exercises or practices using them beyond what you see in your homework. You can go to W3 School, like some of the references you see inside books. And if you haven't already, at each chapter all the way at the end, you'll see these links, right? Like this one doesn't point you to any exercises, but like if you go to, let's see, I think I illustrated this. If you haven't already, you can go to last week's Zoom meeting recording to see what it is. These are APIs and things that goes beyond what your Zybook offers, and you can click into it and do some. And some of those has some online program examples and snippets that you can click into, like this one. If you don't, you can go to any online JavaScript IDE, like JavaScript online IDE, and do the search, and you'll literally come across maybe 4 or 5 of these. I like to use W3 School and can use this. You can go through the topics to see what they are, and you can try yourself. So this will take you to an interactive IDE, integrated development environment, to make changes to and play around with. Okay, so this is what I would recommend for every single one of these topics. Function is a pretty big topic in and of itself. So please expect to spend at least an hour or two, okay, on every single one of these topics. So these are not just let's just get the homework assignment through and be done with it and then done, right? There is a lot of offline studying that is required. So the deeper that you get into it, the wider and that you are able to build the breadth of your knowledge in this language, the better it is for you to be successful in the forthcoming courses, such as the React framework course that follows this, and as well as the capstone project course called Web Development Capstone Project course. I think, what is it? Server-side programming, CIS193. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to read every single one of these objectives, but please go through them and let me know if you have questions. So that's for this week. And then today's format is going to involve, oh, by the way, this is your reading topics, 6.5 through 6.10. Now, in the unlikely event that we're not able to get through every single one of these topics, I'm hoping maybe at least 4 of them, then these 2 topics will be for next week. Okay, and but it doesn't hurt to get started on these chapters as soon as you can. You can even start working on them, but your grades received from these PAs, participation activities, and CA will not be transferred back into Canvas unless you go through that whole link. And those links will be available in future classes, and whatever you did there, I believe it gets saved in your Zybook profile, so all is not lost. But that just just a heads up if you like to study ahead. Any questions so far? Yep. All right, let's begin our course. Before we get into the lectures, there is a whole lot of references here. I gave you quite a few for functions. So there are, in general, 4 ways of writing functions in JavaScript. One of them is declaring a function. The other one is just writing an expression. There's also IFE. This is the crux of what you see in, for example, Microsoft when they came up with the invoke functions, as well as how you can write arrow functions or anonymous functions. So there's a lot of different ways to write functions to enable them in JavaScript. But yeah, I also included a link to this open source textbook called Eloquent JavaScript. There's a lot of, this is all online, by the way. There is also a paper copy of this from Martin Herbert. He also publishes the same pixel, I think for like $10 if you want to purchase it, but otherwise you can access the whole thing online. This should give you access to a wealth of information beyond what you get from your Zeitbook, okay? And my recommendation again, sorry, there's a lot of logistics. I will go through this once more. You should get prepared to, and if I were you, I would print this out. I believe there is a way where you can get to every single chapter and you can print towards the end maybe. But anyway, yeah, I can get to it. But yeah, you can save every single one of these chapters before your subscription expires and come back to it later on and use it, okay? Because I don't want you to lose the whole textbook once the subscription expires. Make sense? All right, let's get together and going on the very first topic. Oh, yes, anybody questions? All right, let me close this. Okay, so we sort of went over majority of the more conditionals, but what we didn't get through was conditional operators. I think some of you probably had some experience with this. So this is the unary operators in JavaScript where we're able to, now I remember, I think we went over this last time, but quickly, condition means true or false, okay? In JavaScript, we don't really call it true or false. We call them truthy and falsy, right? So that's spelled truthy and falsy, right? You should know the differences between the two, but this condition evaluates to, true. When you have an empty string, what is that? This is an empty string. Is that falsy or truthy? Anyone?
Falsy.
Yep. So that means if this thing evaluates to false, falsy means false, right? And truthy is true. So it's a Boolean. Then if true, right, then expression number one is going to be evaluated. If false, otherwise. Okay, expression two. So this is the conditional operator. You see them a lot in JavaScript and any other OOP languages. Now, this is a very important operator because in some of the JavaScript-based framework like React, where you have the ability to kind of write your JavaScript into HTML, and I'll go over more of that if you decide to take on CIS194, which is the course after this. And you can see that they make use of the conditional operators in JSX, which is a syntactic sugar on top of JavaScript. And this is a very specific to React, where you're not able to write if and else anymore. Instead, it allows you to write something like the unary operators in it. There's actually a history behind all of that. So yeah, bear in mind the usefulness of this. And a lot of developers like to use conditional operators because it gives them the ability to write something really succinct. Okay, instead of having 4 or 5 lines of code, you can condense everything into 1 line. Okay, in JavaScript, you can use a semicolon at the end to signify that, hey, this entire unary operator evaluates to a statement like this, right? Here's a semicolon. However, some of the browsers, they don't really care about these operators, these semicolons, so it's pretty loose. If I were you, I would stick to the best practices and make sure that the code that you write is 1, succinct, and 2, easy to be interpreted, right, by other folks and not just you yourself. Because in the future, when you build something great, inevitably you're not going to be able to maintain and sustain them all by yourself. You need to have someone else to work with you to take over some of the maintenance part. And if people don't understand your code, that will render your software pretty useless because you'll be just writing one off. Only one person knows it and no one else does. Okay, so with that, questions on unary operators? Yeah, if not, then we can go over switch statement. You guys all know what if and else statements, right? They're about. And
Yes.
good. And switch statement is essentially a way of writing a whole lot of if and else. So what happens is, let's say if you have a problem space this big, right? This is a problem space. So this is very abstract. Or you can say the scope of it is this big. Like this is the entire universe you have to solve. And within, it's kind of like solving a problem within a constraint. You've been using if and else gives you the ability to kind of split your logical space in either if, right, this condition, or else, right? So 50-50, right? Now, if you use a switch statement, you're able to do a lot of casing, right? This says this value 1, then you do this and that. So in general, you can decompose your entire switch case into a whole lot of if, right, else, if, so on and so forth, and the last one being else to capture the whole thing. So it's kind of like the same problem space, but like divided into so many different chunks, right? And your else here is kind of like your default. Make sense? Anyway, so there's a lot of syntax associated with this. Not gonna have time to go through every single syntax in here, but yeah, please go through the PA, because this is gonna tell you how to best present your switch case from a best practice standpoint, as well as from a syntactical standpoint, making sure that it is logically correct, and it's so you can compile. Okay, so any questions about switch? Oh, by the way, there is a break. Failed to say. The break statement stops the flow of control. So as soon as this break is hit, this exit your entire flow of control or execution out of the switch case. So now that your entire execution goes back to where it came from, right, before it enters switch. So let's say if there is another statement after the switch case, this entire block, then break is going to take you into that very next statement after the switch case block. Does it make sense? All right, yeah, in a typical programming language like C++, there is constraints on what this value should be. Like they must be an integer or integral value. It's the same thing in JavaScript. However, there is no such thing as integer in JavaScript, right? Everything is like there is a number, there's a string, right? There's the object, right? There's a lot of those. So yeah, unfortunately, you don't have integers. So please follow the instructions there, and make sure that you understand the differences between triple equal sign, right, versus the double equal sign. So we went over this for about 5 to 10 minutes last time. All right, any questions so far?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I think I remember reading about a parse int and a parse float. Does that distinguish between the integer and a float?
Yeah, this is parsing and parse flows are pretty typical sort of mathematical methods or functions that allows you to parse a string, right? That is represented by like alphanumeric string, like 1 and 2, into an integer, and the other one allows you to parse them into a number with decimal points. What was your question?
Oh, I was just curious because I thought there was no distinction between an integer and a float, or that there wasn't such thing as an integer in JavaScript. So it was kind of confusing to me.
Oh yeah. No, in general, in any programming languages, integer is like 1, 2, 3, or -1, -2, -3. It goes both ways. So they're what's called unsigned. So you can go either way, and including 0 as well. Flow is something that has the decimal value associated with it. Usually, let's say 3.14156, right? Float usually carries about maybe 7 to 8 decimal values post that decimal sign right there. So these are the two differences. Yes, you do have numbers like that, like 1 point. Hold on a second. I think you do have integers but they're not called integer. They call numbers. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a chapters on type. You can use some of the mathematical libraries in JavaScript, and it starts with math dot something like math dot round. Yeah, these are libraries that you can use to achieve what you want to do. But yeah, normally I wouldn't use JavaScript to compute to do scientific calculations because they are so loosely typed and you can get into a lot of precision issues and you end up getting wrong values and it'll be super confusing. The use of JavaScript typically is to facilitate interactions on your browsers. You can also use JavaScript to write like interaction as in UX, right? On your browser page. You can use JavaScript to facilitate network communications, like stuff in the backend, like in Node.js and stuff like that. But rarely do you use JavaScript to do these float integer conversions. And yeah, because you do get into a lot of precision issues with this script. Okay, let's move on. Any questions? All right. Okay, let's move on to, yeah, I think we should move on to loops. All right. So this is the starting of a point of our lecture. So in general, there's a couple ways to write loops. And what does that mean by loop? Well, a loop is something that gets executed repeatedly. And usually that means a statement, right, with a semicolon, or a couple of them, right? So if you write a loop that goes through these things, you can specify that this entire thing gets iterated maybe n times, right? That's what loop is. You can specify a number of times it goes through this whole body, right? Or this entire thing, with the condition. So depending on what this condition is, you would continuously execute this entire thing until the condition becomes faulty, okay, or falsy. And as long as the condition is truth or truthy, your body statement gets executed repeatedly. So that's what the while loop is. Same thing with other loops like the for loop and do while. So JavaScript does carry a lot of these standard loop syntax that you see in other OOP languages, with the exception of Python. Python looks a little different because you have to write a for and then there's a colon here, right? Something like that. So syntax-wise, Python is slightly different than others, but most of the other mainstream OOP languages, including Java, C, C++, even C Sharp, or like Objective C, they all have very similar syntax, okay? And that you see loop syntax. All right, I don't know if we get a chance to do a participation activity, but yeah, let's just keep on going. It is imperative for you not to get into infinite loop because this is where your computer gets stuck, right? Imagine that you have this executing unit and your computer just keeps on executing the same loop statement over and over again. Eventually, your computer may go up in smoke. That's not good, right? So never write this, right? And I would say you can, but if you know what you're doing, making sure that you're able to break out of the while loop with what's called break, okay, statement. This break is a statement. It's a keyword plus a semicolon to signify this is to be evaluated. So this break will break out of this true. Otherwise, your entire JavaScript just keep on going. Infinite loop is something that is to be frowned upon, and you would never want to get into situations like this because the only way to get out of, let me ask you guys this question: how do you get out of infinite loop? Is there a way can you get out of infinite loop if you did not do so programmatically?
Go to the task manager maybe and kill the application.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, unplug the computer. Yes, yes. Do not unplug your computer. You can do Control C, Control V. Sometimes it does take you out of that. Otherwise, you have to kill the applications, the entire software applications running it. Anyway, yeah. So you see this very unfortunate page unresponsive thing that happens from time to time. Okay, when someone who's careless about setting up this while loop, taking you into this infinite cycles. Same thing with do while. You have the condition, but the only difference between while loop and do while loop is that do while execute one extra instruction, and that allows you to do the very first try. Do, right? So your body statement here gets evaluated one more time than the while counterpart versus while. And then there is a condition, right? So this thing gets evaluated one more. Let's say this is body as well. One more times than this while loop. Okay. So a lot of times people do this because they want that extra try, right? That extra evaluation out there to set up something. And this is the reason why people will use do while to have that one extra try than the while loop. But otherwise, the syntax is very similar. The only caveat is you have to have this semicolon. I know in JavaScript, you may not need this semicolon. At best, you will, you'll just get everything to run. But at its worst, you may get a warning, right? But it's never going to stop you. But it's a best practice to have this semicolon in it. Again, this entire condition is true to false evaluation. You can simply just write like even an empty, right, string, or you can write not a number, and by just putting in there, you can say undefined, and that will make sure this entire while loop is not going to run because undefined, not a number, empty string, these are falsy, so they're evaluated to false. Okay, false. False is not going to drive your entire loop, only the truthy value would. Make sense? Okay, so there's another PA. I will leave you to it because this is your homework. Questions so far?
On the while loop, Professor, if you
Yeah.
have just a while loop, if you have a semicolon, would that be an infinite loop as well? Because it's always gonna be hitting that kind of condition, not the do while, but just the while, and instead of the open close braces, you have
Where's your
a
semicolon?
after the condition.
After condition, so you have a semicolon here. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what you meant by
condition after the close parenthesis of condition and then semicolon.
I don't think this is even syntactically correct. So let's say if you write something like this and then semicolon, yeah, this is not this in other languages they'll give you compiler error. Compiler error. Yeah, in JavaScript just-in-time interpreter, I'm pretty sure they probably can give you something, but yeah, this is a good questions because I never tried it.
Yeah,
Typically people don't.
it's an infinite loop, like the participation exercise, the third one.
I think, yeah, that's why I asked that too, because I was kind of thinking that would be an infinite loop because it's gonna only stop on the while and it keeps on repeating itself no matter what.
Yeah, so normally people wouldn't write something like this. As I know in OOP languages with compilers, you cannot compile something like this. But with just-in-time interpreters, there's a leeway where you can get through. If this one doesn't give you any error, then yeah, this sounds like it's kind of missing this. But then if you take out what's inside the body, you don't really need the scope.
I think it's this. I think it's the same thing, Professor, in C++. If you have that semicolon, it's gonna be infinite loop. If I do remember that, like let's say while true and then semicolon, that would basically render it. Even though while condition 5 less than 10, which is true, and then semicolon that would keep on infinitely looping because the statement itself is true.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you get, yeah, so I'm pretty sure in the IDEs, you'll get some sort of warning telling you why are you doing this. And a lot of times some IDs might be intelligent enough to be able to catch that this is a Boolean and it's soon to be on its infinite loop setup, and then you have this semicolon without any conditions or any body statement to exit out of this true. Yeah, I think it could be a warning. It has to be a warning, otherwise it'll just, you know, sometimes you can have thousands of lines of code and you don't catch this, and then it just results in a terrible crash at the end.
And if you have no open and closed braces, it would only execute one statement body under the while loop, correct?
If you don't have,
Like the open and closed
right.
braces?
Yeah, it will, well, the condition will be evaluated first. This is a little different than do while. So if the condition is true for the very first time, yes, the body will be evaluated. If the very first condition, let's say if you have while.
I mean, if you have 3 statements after the while loop, which you actually intend to include in the loop,
Yeah.
but you don't have that braces, it would only execute the first statement.
That's right. Yeah. So the question is this: if you have this while and then you include one statement here with a semicolon, and then you have 2 more, 3 more, it doesn't matter. What your compiler is going to do, or in this case, just in time, is going to capture just, give me a second, this portion. That's correct. This is the same with for loop as well. You can write initialization condition and incrementations and then do a semicolons here. This will evaluate this only once, because there's nothing to evaluate. Actually, no, it depends on how many times this condition is true. Yeah, which we'll go through in the next step. But same thing with while, and so is with for. If you don't have any curly braces, put them in a block, and you just have a whole bunch of statement after it, your compiler is going to take just the for loop plus the very first line of code with the semicolon as that whole block right there, and everything else will just be outside of that for loop. Questions? Any questions? All right, there's a couple of exercises here, so please do them. And I think I went over while loops. Your for loop, just a quick illustrations here. You do have 3 blocks, 3 statements, and the very first one is called initialization. This allows you to initialize your index or counter. Sometimes people call them counter. And this counter usually is initialized to 0, but you can initialize it to any number. As long as this counter is within that condition, which evaluates to true. Let's say I is my counter and I less than 100. So this is what? This is your conditional, right, statement. This conditional statement evaluates to true or false. Is truthy or falsy, right? And if true, then your body is going to be evaluated. The final expression typically is what we call increment or decrement. So sometimes you can do I plus plus or plus plus I, or you can do I minus minus or minus minus I, right? So there are 4 ways to write them. Either you use postfix, prefix, doesn't matter, because this entire evaluation is going to be, or the expression is really a statement that will be evaluated. And it doesn't matter you doing this prefix or postfix. I hope that makes sense. So there's actually a distinction between this and that, but I don't think it's important for JavaScript use cases that we're trying to illustrate. Any questions about for loop? So an example of a for loop will be something like this. If I want to evaluate something 5 times, I can say I equals 0, I less than 5, and then semicolon, I plus plus, okay? Or I can do plus plus I, doesn't matter. And curly braces, and I put the statements there. Okay, so this entire thing right here will be evaluated 5 times. Why? Well, first time when I equals what? 0. Second time, I equals 1. Third time, I equals 2. I equals 3, right? So on. So for the last one will be I equals 4, right? 4 is less than 5, right? So it's true. So very next time that I becomes 5, guess what? yeah, this one is not gonna, it's not gonna go right, because this condition gets checked before anything that is encapsulated in this entire loop gets to evaluate. Okay. All right. I think that should be it. There's a whole lot of stuff. Please do check. Oh, break and continue statement. We already talked about break. So the continue statement here is kind of similar to break in that continue allows for some, execution, right? Your flow of control needs to be continued rather than being broken up, right? So break takes you out, right, out of this loop, but continue, however, continues to the next guy right here, starting with C++, this one, okay? So continue actually goes into the C++ to advance your index one more, and then checking to see this C, this new C or index is still falling within that constraint of less than or equal to 5. If so, your entire if is going to be evaluated, and so on and so forth. Make sense? So continue is very, very different from break in that regard. And continue does not allow you to continuously evaluate, whatever the next statement is, right? It simply just continues with iteration, continues the iterations, foregoing whatever's left, right? So this is a very important thing to remember, because a lot of students, they don't think, they don't think twice, and they see continue as in, oh, maybe this is just a pass through, that means we should continue. No, it doesn't. It's not a pass through, because it stops right there. Your console log C will never get evaluated if continue is hit. Does it make sense? So I want to make sure this is the concept that you guys get. Otherwise, it will be very confusing later on. Yeah. Any questions about break and continue statements? All right, so these are keywords. So please do spell them correctly. Otherwise, they'll, it's not capital B or capital C here. Has to be correct. Otherwise, your program is not going to compile and run. In the JavaScript sense, you don't compile this. Yes, your JavaScript is not. It's not going to be interpreted correctly and run in real time. Cool. All right, there goes your loops. Any questions? Let me know. But otherwise, let's move on to the very next one. All right, so let's talk about function. So function is a concept that exists in other languages. Function is a group of statements, period. It allows you, it's almost like a, the way I like to think about it is a black box that, and bear with me, folks. I know some of you probably had more advanced programming languages, but this is web development. So some of you may not have the same. So this is a function. Function is almost like a black box here. I throw them in red, and you have a set of inputs, and you have an output. Okay, that's what a function is. And inside this block is a whole lot of statements, right? Statements is those executing, lines of code with semicolon. So, and then you can, and as part of your input, you can specify the parameters. So this input could also be called param list, parameters list, or list of them, right? So you can have a list of, X, Y, Z, whatever this is, and you can submit this entire list into a function to compute. And the outcome of what comes out of this black box is what we call output. And output typically has one value. Sometimes it doesn't have any value at all. So that's by and large what a function is from a 30,000-foot view. And you can always make a function call. This is what we call invocation, okay? Or invoking a function means that you'll be calling this entire black box once with some of the user provided signal that goes into this box, which outputs something, a value, so on and so forth. And when you do that from an invocation standpoint, you're sending these parameters list into a function. They're actually called arguments, right? But the parameter is what your function takes. So one of them is the sender and the other one is recipient. So these naming conventions differ. From a function standpoint, these things these input values are what's called parameters. But from an invocation standpoint, somebody who calls the function, those parameters are what's called arguments. Okay, so that's the distinction between the two. Does it make sense? So this is the reason when you define a function or declare a function, you put in the parameter's name, right? You don't call them argument 1, argument 2. Argument is something that when you do, let's say when you call function name, you invoke it with maybe 1, 2, or 3. So 1, 2, and 3 is what we call arguments, okay? But 1, 2, and 3 in the context of your function is called parameters 1, parameters 2, parameters 3, so on and so forth. All right, there's another thing about declare. So declare means to write out the function signature, to write out basically the facade, and you declare it, okay? But you don't define it. So there's a difference between definition and declarations in programming language. Declaring means just write out the function. Define means that you also write out the statements, okay? So I want to make it absolutely clear, otherwise it becomes confusing later on when we get through more topics. All right, questions about function. There's actually a lot more to function. Please go through these exercises. You can try to do a 2x speed, but yeah, expect to spend quite some time going through them. If you don't get it, do it again until you get it. Okay, so one example of writing a function is to declare it with a name. And typically, and this is where the best practice is, you would not write a function name, you know, with, let's say, x, and then try to put underscore t or underscore, right? Something like that. So this is not a good name, right? Not a good name. The best way to write function, this is, I agree with this, is to use a verb and then try to use the camel casing and not snake casing. Okay, snake casing means you will have something like underscore, like a snake in between, you know, like X and Y. You don't do snake. You use camel, right? Camel casing. Camel casing is like hump, right? This is the lowercase, and then this is the uppercase. So you build something like this. And then you write them out explicitly to tell other folks what this function is about to do. You start with a verb, like print, you know, statement, you know, 1, you know, at a time, right? So you use a camel casing for this. And yeah, if you ever program this is in Mac, right? Mac will tell you that, hey, this is the standard. And typically that's the standard in industry anyway. So any questions about this declaration, how to name your function names and stuff like that? All right. Yeah, just remember that you know, when you do these participation activity, if you get them wrong, that's okay. Just you can go back, right? So this is an interactive way of getting things done. Let's just do one of them. So the very first one says, which function call displays the number 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? Remember, you have a function name called countdown. You want this to display 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you kind of have to specify what the first number is, should be, right? If you look at this entire for loop, what does it do? It's initializing your index or your counter to the very first number, right? And then this is kind of like count greater than, right? So this is going down, right, in a descending order. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It kind of tells you what this is. And so it's imperative that you start with the very first argument with a value of 5, right? Yeah, and then this function takes only 1 parameters. So what happens? Should it be this? No, right? Because there's no parameters. Should it be these? This is not, right? Because there's like 5 of them, and this is contrary to the function signature. Your declaration doesn't specify 5 of these parameters, so you end up with 1. So the answer is this. Okay? Yeah, a lot of times you can kind of extrapolate based on what's given there to kind of drive the decision making. And this is what I want you to think about it on your feet. Okay, so please do not you know, just take it for granted. And I know some of you are probably going to do this, right? You're going to click on this. Oh, this is no. Oh, okay, click on next, right? And then you just blindly do this. That does not translate to any value at all. You do not learn anything from just clicking these around. I know you can kind of game the system that way, but why pay $57 for the subscription to Zybook and 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 try to stick it out the whole semester with me for 8 weeks and learn nothing, right? So don't do this, okay? Please. Same thing with your challenge activities too, and don't like ChatGPT the whole thing, because you're not going to learn anything from it. People can, you can still game the system, but at the end you learn nothing, which is not really the objective of this course. All right. And I wanted to make one more mention. You are 100% allowed, and I would encourage you to form a study group. And if you can, get with folks on campus. If you want, you can go on Slack. You can see each other's through that meet and greet to know who these people are, and maybe you had some classes with them. You can do a virtual study group with them, okay? And if you like, get together and study these things together, and do them all together is fine too, because these are not something that requires you to be proctor and do it on your own. You can totally do these together in a group setting. Okay, this is where learning actually takes flight. So encourage you to do that. But if there's any submissions that like challenge activities where you have to write something, I would prefer you to just write it yourself, unless it gets super complicated. In that case, you can reach out to me. You guys can also talk about your approach to solving a programming problem. That is fine too, but just don't Control-C, Control-V, and copy someone else's code that they Slack you with, and then paste them in there just for the sake of getting these Zybook points. Okay. All right. I think by this point, I think 90% of you probably had Zybooks before, and you know how this works. You can, for like this one, you can write code, and then you can try to run it and see what it goes, right? You can change this. I mean, I believe this is interactive, so if you do it now, you can see the changes. So this is embedded IDE for your use, and you can do this infinite number of times. There is no limit until you get it, but please do, and do not try to look at the solutions. I don't think even they'll give you the solution, but if they do, try not to look at it, okay? All right, so a function returns something, and this is what you typically see with a returned statement. And if you don't have any return statement, this function returns nothing, which is fine. You would want this function to return something because after some computations, you want a value out of this function, right? Otherwise, this function would serve you no good. You have a whole bunch of logic in there, it returns nothing. In other languages, you can do pass by reference, and you don't have to return anything. You'd be modifying the original object, but JavaScript's not like that, okay? And I wanted to stress the point that JavaScript is not your Java, okay? JavaScript and Java, these are two different things. They have no relationship to each other whatsoever, but they share very, very similar syntax with each other, okay? Again, you can go through this animation to see what this return thing is actually doing. But what I wanted to focus on next is your function expressions and anonymous function, or this. Oh, by the way, folks, a couple of warning mentions. I do want to give you a 5 minutes break on the top of the hour. So we started our course at 6:35. I'll give you 5 minutes break at 7:35. Okay, and then upon the break, we'll come back and resume the rest. So I like to kind of break our lectures every week into two sections, like first half and second half. Okay, so in about 5 more minutes, I'll give you 5 minutes break. So the other two ways of writing your function is you can write a function expression, and function expression looks something like this. This is identical to the declaration itself, which is just like this is declaration, right? And your function expression is sometimes your function name may be omitted. So a function without a name is what's called anonymous function. And so just everyone's on the same page. Everything is an object in JavaScript, including the function itself. So a function without a name is an object. So what you're doing with an object, right? This might be kind of counterintuitive, but if you were to think, hey, function is an object, then you can totally assign object to another object, right? This is the kind of the essence behind object-oriented programming, where you can get a reference of that object or the memory address of it and assign that memory address to the other. Kind of like what's happening right now when you see this function could be assigned a value, right? To or it could be treated as a value to to have the entire thing stored in this other variable name. But if you look at the function from the perspective of it being an object with some sort of memory address associated with it, it totally makes sense, right? You're saying, hey, this entire object, it's assigned to this guy right here, so that this guy, right, display sum, becomes the function itself. Does it make sense? So that's exactly what happened. Like, this is very, very JavaScript centric, and it's not something that you see in any other languages. But you can literally do a function expression. Expression means to evaluate this, right? Expression is to be evaluated. So function itself is an object. You can treat this function as a function expression to be evaluated into something, and that something could be assigned to this variable, let variable. And this let variable will assume the behaviors and the properties of a function, what a function normally would do, like this. Does it make sense? So this is one idiosyncrasy that you see a lot of times in JavaScript, where you can actually write a function expression, okay, this way. Now, what gets really interesting is you sometimes you can have an analysis function. An analysis function is a function, but without a name, right? So how do you declare a function without a name, right? So this is a very interesting properties of JavaScript where you don't see anywhere else, and it does get some use to, after a certain amount of practices. And if you still have questions about this, let me know, okay? But otherwise, it looks something like this. Let me see if I can. Oh, by the way, there's a couple of PAs here for function expressions. Function. Yeah, so this is anonymous function. This is one example where there is a function, but there's no name, right? Typically, you see a function, right, with a name. But hey, this one doesn't have name. So that's anonymous function. Anonymous function is always associated with some sort of function expression syntax. So you will see a function that gets assigned to something else with no name associated with it. That's function expression. Okay, so this is a very important aspect of JavaScript, because you always use function for solving certain problems, and a function without a name is always involved. Okay, and what is going to be really interesting is where you get into arrow function. Now, this is a very new concept in JavaScript, where you don't see this from ES5. So I believe arrow function is part of ES6, which came out in 2015-ish, maybe 8 years ago, when ES6 came out. By the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, ES6 is the new kind of latest and greatest. Right now, I think they have ES13 now. But ES6 is more of a Java-oriented way of representing JavaScript, and it represents a brand new paradigm where you don't see them before in JavaScript. So 2015 was a big year for JavaScript. They introduced what's called arrow functions. This allows you to write something that assume function behaviors to be just like function. And arrow function declaration that returns a single expression is something like this. You use arrow, and this arrows is the equal sign with a greater than sign concatenated together, and this will evaluate something. Okay, let me see what else. Yeah, so instead of writing this function and say, hey, I'm gonna have this thing declare, with this expression, or if I want to just write a function with this type of declaration with a name, kind of like traditional way of writing a function, sure, I can do that. But if I don't, I can simply just use an arrow and say, hey, let's evaluate this. And by entering this parameters 1 and 2, this is going to take me into this expression. And this expression is going to have parameters 1 or 2, juxtaposing them. So one example is this, right? Where you have AB, which is literally a function without a name, without anything, like nothing. It doesn't even have any function name in it, right? This function keyword in it. but you have this arrow. So every time you see something like this with an arrow, that is what's called arrow function. And this a and b is going to be evaluated into what? This expression. This expression says a plus b with a semicolon. So this expression becomes a statement that will be evaluated based on a and b. In this case, 3 and 6 equals 9. And find sum is going to be 9. Okay, so you have a lot of stuff going on in this one line of code. All right, any questions about functions at all? I know we spent not a lot of time on an arrow function, but it does just look like this. Again, if you put everything in the perspective of a function, just an object, okay, that occupies some sort of memory space, and it totally makes a lot of sense now. It makes a lot more sense than before if we use it in the form of arrow, in the form of expression, in the form of a anonymous function, so on and so forth, versus the traditional function signature that involves the name like this. Okay, so the latter two, function expression and anonymous function, and as well as the arrow function, takes a little bit getting used to with time. Okay, so yeah, if this is foreign to you, please go through the function MSDN. I think a W3 school also should have this. Let me see. JavaScript tutorial. Yeah, they should have plenty of examples. So when you come across this entire chapter, yeah, go through JavaScript function, even though the link didn't take you there, but W3 School has it, where you can practice writing, the regular way of declaring a function here. You can also go through the function return example, and this is where the regular function invocation takes place, right? So on and so forth. I think there is probably more to this. Anyway, you can also do search for arrow function. So just letting you know, it should come up with something, even though I never tried it before. Arrow functions. Yeah. So there's a lot of practices where you can get, examples and try yourself. That takes you to these. Okay. Now, in a normal semester of 16 weeks, I will go through this in fine-tooth comb, but not in this session. Okay. Questions? All right. I hope the cadence is okay, but if you find this way too hard, please go through the recorded session. Please also go through these, references to get yourself acquainted with the concept. Okay. And then you can always ping me on Slack if you come across any issues understanding certain things. All right. So we are 2 topics down. This is our 3rd topic, which is the scope and global object. Now, if you'll remember last week, we talked a little bit about this, right? There is the difference between let and var. I've also added a few references. If you go back to modules 1, this was not available last week, but yeah, I believe I added this one. But if you haven't had a chance to go through them, you can see the difference between the two. I made a recording out of this on YouTube, and so they'll be available there if you like. Go through them at your own time. Okay, but otherwise, we spoke about this last time. There's a difference between when we say scope. This is data access. Local scope means any variables at a local setting will be able to know each other. When something is on a global scope, this means that everybody sees it, right? It's like, I think I used the analogy last week. If you, let's say, put together a firework and everybody sees it, firework goes on the outside, right? Everyone who can kind of see the sky sees it. But if you put the firework inside your house, by the way, nobody does that, right? But just an example, then people from the outside, your neighbors, may not see it because everything's kind of located in the house, right? So that's local scope. When you put something outside, everybody sees it. That's global scope. Same thing applies to variables. When a variable is local, that means everybody sees it locally, but they don't see it outside. So here's an example of what is inside, what is outside, and then you can kind of go through these participation activity to really understand what's going on there. If you still don't, you can ask questions on general forum. When I say general forum, I meant on Slack. And I monitor Slack on a daily basis, so I'll chime in, and most likely students will too. Yeah, so everything is an object in JavaScript. And since JavaScript works in the context of the browser, a lot of times you would see something like window object, right? This window is that entire window that you're looking at right now. This is literally your browser window here. So this entire browser window, which is termed window in JavaScript, is a global object where everybody sees it. Now, if this window object is not global, that means you cannot really make use of it, because the moment that that you write your JavaScript, this window object is already a local, which you probably don't have access to, right? So a lot of times these global thing is public. A lot of time these local thing, they are kind of private to within that scope. And in order to enact a scope in JavaScript, as well as in some of the languages, you would just put down the curly braces like this. So if you do a var I, and then you try to do console log. Okay, so console log here, this is printing to your console. Okay, your console is like your CMD in Windows, in your JavaScript. Let's say in the context of this browser, your console is this guy right here. I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is your console, right? Like right here, this entire area. This entire area is your console. Okay, so when you do a console log, let's say 1, this entire thing goes here. Okay, and remember, this is your console tab that shows this one. I have a dark mode enabled, so everything's kind of like white on black, but your view might be a little different. Okay, and then you'll see 1 printed here. Okay, so that's console.log. So console is another global object, right? This allows you to make use of this console object anytime, anywhere inside your JavaScript. Okay, just like your browser, if you run it in the context of your browser. Make sense? Let me see what else. Yeah, again, please visit vars and let in MDM or W3 School. Going back to my references that I gave you here, you should have pretty good understanding of it, and please don't just second guess, especially this one, right? You see this participation, like some students will have tendency of doing 2x speed and they just run it and then just click through these, right, for the sake of turning this in, but you learn nothing at the end, okay? Because and I don't want you to do that. I'd rather you spend the time do this, and hey, professor, I don't have the time to finish it, and I'll give you an extension, you know, I'll let you take it later, but don't just you know, you got 2 minutes left before the due date and you try to do this. You know, that's not good. All right, if you need time, just let me know, and case by case. Okay, I have to say, otherwise everyone asks me for extension, and there's no deal there. Any questions so far before we move on to the next?
The question about var and let, I know that they use var and let on the global scope, but is that really interchangeable, Professor, when you use a var or a let?
Yeah, so what happens in ES5, there's no such thing as let. They're not interchangeable in the sense that whatever is declared as a let, that variable using let is not going to have a global scope, period. I think, yeah, it might, I don't know if you have, yeah, I have to say we don't have 8 minutes to go through this. Otherwise, yeah, go through them, but they're not interchangeable. No. You can say everything that you declare as a let could be used var. Okay, you can use var for, but not the other way around. So you can kind of think of like let as the more restricted form of var. Var is like everybody sees it. Let is only when, you know, within scope.
So in practice, if you really want to use a variable, it's better to use var so that your functions might be able to actually use it if you
No.
want to use it in global scope all the
No,
time?
var is the source of a lot of bugs in JavaScript, and this is the reason why they introduced let. In the past, people use var. Let's say var x, right? You have so JavaScript doesn't really know, like it just sees that hey, every time you have a var, that's global right there, right? And then there's like this, and at some point maybe there's a for loop, there's a while loop, whatever, and then boom, there's another I here. But this I is not the same as that I, right? I want to make this I to be different. But hey, after thousands of lines of code, it's very hard. Like nobody would do a find I to see, hey, has this I been used before? And then all of a sudden there's a bug, okay? Because everything is var. So instead of doing this, which kind of opens up to a lot of risks, people start to kind of differentiate the use of the local versus global by using let a lot more, because you only need a variable, truth be told, for a fraction of the time, or maybe in this section of your code, like in this section, right? Right. You don't want to like this let this variable x, right, to go out of here, right? This is where I want to keep my x right here. But hey, if you don't want to do that, then maybe you can said, let's let x to be on the outside of my code, and then whatever is inside, I'm not going to use x, right? Don't use x. So that way, there's a way you can control things. But hey, if you want to have a really, really restrictive use of like local is local, global is global, then you define function, right? And then, whatever function does is really not like implementation detail for the function. The business logic is no one else's business. That's why you encapsulate everything into it. So the use of let and var evolves into much better writing in JavaScript versus everything is var, right? Which kind of opens up to a lot of risks. Make sense?
Yeah. So mostly the thing is just to use let in most of the codes nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, ES6 doesn't. I mean, people still do kind of both, because a lot of times you come across backward compatibilities, that code that was written years ago. They're strewn with vars everywhere. You don't just convert this var into let without breaking it, So, but in writing new codes, you can use both. But as long as you make it really clear that hey, var is for global and let is only for local, to separate, basically to kind of de-risk so that you don't run into using a global variable by mistake, claiming it inside a local scope business function that produces the wrong values at the end due to this interoperability. So yes, I mean the best case, people will probably say, hey, never use vars anymore, I just use let, and you can do that. And I would agree to that sentiment too. Okay. All right, let's see. There's I think otherwise we're done with this one. Spend maybe half an hour on this at the minimum. Okay, please don't treat this as a pass through, because like students will click on this and then try to game the system and say, oh, this is great, yeah, and I'm done, right? So like literally you can finish each chapter in like 5 minutes. I do not condone this kind of behavior. Please don't to do that. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is called arrays. I already said everything is in JavaScript is an object, so it's an array. Array is an ordered collection of values, and you guys kind of know, right? Some of you probably took my data structure class as well. Array is sequentially ordered, random with sequential ordered access. And this order's access is what's called random, because you can specify any I as index to fetch anything. So you can I could be 1, I could be 2, I could be 0, and then you get instant access, right? So the way that you would create an array, which is a group of objects in JavaScript, is use the bracket notation. Okay, so remember this bracket notation is very important, because at some point you're going to see the curly braces notation. This is what's called object. And this thing is called array. Okay, And when you have a lot of them, you call them arrays. You can also create arrays with objects inside or array with brackets inside. So JavaScript is very flexible. So you can literally declare this entire data structure called array using this bracket notation just like that, like this, right? Starting with nothing in it, and then you can start putting stuff in it. There is no capacity constraint. You don't have to say, hey, this array only has 10 elements inside. You can literally start with integer. So it's almost like a unbounded, array or dynamically sizable array with no limits. The only limit being your memory constraint, right? At some point, your computer runs out of memory, and then you got a problem. But otherwise, you can keep doing this. So this is an example of how you would initialize and display array elements. Again, I'm running this through very quickly. Declaration means you declare something with let, and you say x equals this bracket notation, kind of similar to this. Or you can say var x, right? Doesn't matter. But use of var is pretty dangerous. As I told you, you can create a public, a global variable and use it unknowingly. And just because it is global, everybody sees it, you can use it. Not that you have to use it, but you ended up using it. You know what I mean? Mistake. Anyway, so this is your declaration and initialization. So you are literally writing a initialization that includes the declaration of this array, but also in JavaScript, there is no such thing as data type array. So you would literally declare using a var or let with the name of the value equals to whatever this is, right? So the type is implicit, meaning if you have this entire array on the right-hand side, implicitly it's going to be converted into this value. And this entire, so if you do a type, I believe there is a data type libraries in JavaScript. But anyway, its method is called type. You can say, what is this type? It will show you this as an array, okay? When you print it to the console, you can do console log, okay, type. You'll get something like that, okay? So this entire implicit, like x could be anything. X could be an object. X could be an array. X could be a number or string, like 2. Or x could be, -1, right? So this is how loose JavaScript is in terms of type enforcement. So you got to be super careful with what you can do. At the same time, it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can write code pretty quick without having to go through these compilation processes. If your code doesn't work, your browser lets you know right away, or your IDE lets you know right away. There's no complicated compilation process, and then you have to check the syntax, you have to correct it. Either it works or it doesn't, right? If it doesn't, that's too bad. You run this in a browser, nobody sees it, right? That's the problem. So you have to use an IDE to really get the best out of JavaScript. And if you don't want to purchase an IDE, that's okay. I mean, there's free ones out there, but you can also use your web browsers like this. Okay, I'm using Chrome, so you can inspect the element or inspect to start writing code. And I think I mentioned this before. You can explore around these functionalities. You can literally write codes here and put some breakpoint and start debugging your JavaScript and not put everything in the console. But since this is also in your browser, you can literally write JavaScript that runs above in here to animate some stuff up there. So this is the reason why people love the Google products so much, because they are so developer friendly. You can start using these IDEs free of charge. All right. There's also what's called headless JavaScript, where you don't have this pretty user interface. You can literally run your DOM model or DOM object models using JavaScript without having this pretty interface. And this happens a lot when you do backend, coding using JavaScript like Node.js, okay, to work with a headless browser purely from a data standpoint. All right, let me see if there's anything more to arrays. So you guys know what an array is, right? It's like this, when you have a collection of values. And in JavaScript, these array, they can have various different types. So what's really weird about this, and also in Python as well, they don't always have to be integers. So this is where you can kind of get into this collection of things, even though they are kind of like lists, right, with sequential access. But the type is so loosely defined in JavaScript. Literally, you can build a lot of stuff that you couldn't using a standard, more controlled object-oriented programming language. Okay, this is the reason why you have to be super careful with JavaScript and knowing exactly what you need done. Okay, so I don't know if you had some data structure class before, but there's such thing called stack, and this is where push and pop is. So stack is kind of a last in, first out data structure that allows you to, push stuff in, one at a time. So let's say this is option number one. This is operation number 1, 2, and 3. And if you were to pop something, it will pop from the last in, first out. As in the very last element that got in is the first one to be popped. So this is pushed. And this is push. This is also push, but this is a pop. Okay, this is push. So you pop the 3 out. And this is the push and pop. So array is kind of like that, but it makes use of push and pop, as in you can push an element in. Let's say if you push 8, then 2, 4, 6, the one after that is going to be 8. You're going to get this. If you pop something out, then it's going to pop the last one, right? Last in, first out. So the very last one in was 6. So this, when you pop the nums, which is an array, you will pop the very last element. So this is last in, first out, LIFO, okay? You also have on shift and shift. These are pretty standard array methods that allow. Why does array have methods? Well, because array is an object. Object in programming language is something that occupies a certain amount of memory space. It's literally an instance of a class, and this class name is an array, and this entire class has a lot of behavior associated with it. These are push and pop, on shift and shift. So what does shift do? It moves the first array elements, returns the element. What does on shift means? Well, adds a value to the beginning of the array. So this is almost like FIFO. What is FIFO? Q, right? So this is first in, first out. That's right. So like a line of people at, I don't know, in front of Costco checkout line, line of people in front of a, I don't know, Space Mountain in Disneyland. First in, first out, right? Unfortunately, they don't call it in queue and DQ. There's a name for it. In queue as in, I want to queue up stuff. DQ as in I want to remove an element from this queue. But they call it shift and on shift. Okay, so that's kind of the idiosyncrasies that you see also in JavaScript. Yeah, just go through these examples. You'll get used to it over time. There might be some examples where you have to make use of splice. So this is where you so splice means to separate, the opposite of concatenate something. So you would want to splice this up. I think they use these terminologies in animation, like programming animations, game development. You can create splice. You can splice an image, into 3 sections, like this section and this section and this section, where you can, manage the animation of each of these. So you do a lot of that. Anyway, so these are some of the more popular methods that you see inside this array objects in JavaScript. Okay, and again, each of this topic requires some time for you to get through. Let's quickly go through, now that we have a little bit more time, to loop through an array. So to loop through an array, you have to know kind of its size. Otherwise, you cannot really write a loop to it, right? For it. So the way to do that is to invoke its length. So if you have an array object, let's say this R is, it's got X and Y inside, and this is a string, and you say var, or you can do let. Now you can invoke what's called dot length to get the size of your array. Your size is the number here. There are 2 elements, right? So your length is going to be 2. So this is going to be 2. Well, this one is 4 because you got 3 of them. So this is going to be 3. So you can kind of iterate through your groceries array object using these conventions by invoking the array's dot length attributes. Okay, same thing with for of. However, you don't really need to specify the number of objects in there. You can use the for and let of, for of. Now this approach is pretty modern. This is, I forgot the name of it, but there's a paradigm associated with this type of thing. So it's kind of like writing, Java, right? Where you have items, okay? Where you can just iterate or loop through the thing using this colon sign, but in JavaScript you use of. So for of. I also have a video that talks about these things, and also for each as well. These are modern approaches. When you get into functional programming, you start seeing a lot of these things because they actually eliminate the use of this side effect. This is what we call side effect. And instead, you can utilize this iterator. This is the iterator pattern, which is essentially a reference inside this entire array object that allows you to internally iterate through every single element inside. However, that entire iteration index is not exposed. So there is no side effect. Like user will not, will not be able to temper with this I, right? Imagine you write this entire for loop with this I equals 0, and at some point you say I equals 1000, right? I don't know why people do that, but people do make mistakes like this. Then all of a sudden that renders the entire for loop useless, right? It changes the original intent. So instead of doing that, let's not use I at all. Let's use for of. Let's use for each, okay? So these are embedded iterator patterns that are part of your array object in JavaScript. So yeah, go through these in details, and yeah, you just kind of have to learn the rope as you go through them, and there's no magic sauce for memorizing it. And I don't want you to memorize these things because, if you do, good for you, but hey, like 2 days later, I'll ask you the same thing, you'll probably forget. So the best way to go about them is just to go through some examples, and eventually they kind of become muscle memory. And that's fine. You don't remember the whole thing, but at least next time that you have to do it, you look up on W3 School, and boom, everything comes back, right? Because you did it before, you kind of have that muscle memory that you remember. This helps you get better at things over time, and it actually shortens your muscle memory shortens your onboarding time. Then the next time that you have to onboard the same knowledge again. Okay. All right, you're gonna see, this thing is, dot length. There's a couple of these practices for you. Let me see, passing array to function. Oh yeah, this is another thing too. You can actually pass an array as an argument to function, or you can pass a whole bunch of them to functions like this. So in this case, this numbers is actually an array because you see here, exam score is treated as an array right here. And because these things are passed in as a group of elements, you're actually getting a group of elements into the function, as a parameter. And that's great because you can send a whole object. And the reason you can do that is because an array is an object, so you can pass them. So if you start to think in terms of, hey, everything is an object, everything has, memory address associated with it, and you can do a lot of stuff with it, regardless this is an array or what, you can totally do it. And if you study C++ before, or even Java, when you pass an array into a function, what are you actually passing? You're passing the pointer to the very first memory address of the memory address of the very first element of the array. Okay, I know this is a load of it, but what I meant is this. You have an array like this. Okay, let's say, like exam scores. So there's actually a memory address associated with each of these slots right here. Okay, so this memory address is sequential. So first one could be 0 times 2a. The second one could be 0 times 3a. This next one could be 0 times 4a, so on and so forth. When you pass, let's say this is ARR, this ARR into a functions like this, you're passing in this address into the function. So this function knows the exact location or the beginning location of this block of code. And then you kind of have to pass in also the size of this so that you know where to end your iterations. Otherwise, sky is the limit. You pass in the beginning address, you don't have the end address. So that's in C++. In Java, you pass in a memory address also as this guy right here. And however, they don't have pointers, so they use reference. Reference essentially is memory address. Okay. So what happens in JavaScript is the same. It's just that they don't really talk about pointer or references in JavaScript. And these are two schools of thoughts, right? Like JavaScript developers, they probably had some fundamental courses before they understand this. But some of the front end web developers, they don't really have these type of training, so they don't really think in terms of what's going on inside these numbers. But anyway, I'm going above and beyond, showing you what is going on in the behind the scene. To whether you appreciate it or not, this is just the context behind what's going on with every single line of code associated with the arrays. So this whole array topic is pretty big. If you start to look into the application of what this data structure, by the way, arrays, the data structure, you will see that there's a lot of methods and that you can apply on top of array to help you find the index of something inside the array. This is what we call search. Okay, so search means let's go through every single element inside the array or this group of elements to find the desired one that I'm looking for. So you would have index of, as in score is this. I want to find the index of 92. So 92 is the second one, which occupies the index I equals 1, right? Because array indexing starts with 0. So 0 is 80, 1 is 92, 75 is 3, so on and so forth. You can also find index of, again, there's a lot of different methods. These are variations of different methods in JavaScript, in Java, in C++, they're all pretty much the same. That allows you to fetch and search for elements inside the array. All right, I'm going to pause right now for any questions you may have. All right, folks, I know I'm going pretty fast on stuff like this, but this is all, you guys are getting 3 credits out of this is in 8 weeks, right? So there's a lot of studying on your own, okay? There's also called what's sorting array. This allows you to sort something by ascending order or descending order respectively, and you can define on whether you want to do ascending or descending. So ascending means increasing, descending means decreasing. So a lot of these elements will have some sort of integral value associated with them. Some of these values may have some lexicographical order associated with them. So these are alphanumeric, like integers or strings. You can also store them in increasing or decreasing, depending on how you lexicographically define the ordering of these relationship among these elements with respect to each other. All right. I'm going to pause right here. Any questions about arrays? All right, let's quickly look at how much we've gone. Okay, so yeah, these 4 topics, it's definitely pretty big chapters, okay, in a standard JavaScript course. I only give you 1 chapter for functions, but if you go to, I believe, chapter 4 or 5, I don't have the reference pages here, you will get to those chapters easily, okay, by going through this starting point. So next up is object, and maybe what I'll do, because I know we only have about 2 hours or so for today's lectures or any lectures in general, I would go through objects and we can study map next time. Okay. So one more thing about object. So we talked about array, and this object literally is using just a pair of curly braces. So this is an object notation, and you'll see this curly braces right here that defines what an object is. And if you look at this entire object sitting inside this curly braces, what you have is a whole bunch of key value pairs, okay, like K1 colon, okay, V1, key 1, value 1, key 2, value 2, key 3, value 3, and then you have Kn, value n, right? So on and so forth, and with a comma, right? At the end, you see commas right here. Okay, so this is really it. You can even make these keys like your array, right? Because everything is an object, so key could be an object itself. But normally we use key as just a keyword, and you will use the value as maybe another array or something. So you'll see something like this, right? Where this is an array, like this value is literally an array, and keywords, right, is the key associated with this entire array. So you can juxtapose these things, like essentially an object, with a whole lot of key values associated with it, and then all of a sudden you put arrays inside. And then inside the array, you can have another object. So you can have these very complicated arrays and objects of arrays, and things like that, strewn all over the places. And eventually you'll build something like JSON. Right? Java's simple notations here. This is something that you see a lot as a data type to communicate informations from one end of your net into another. So a lot of client-server application makes use of JSON as a data format to transmit stuff. And if you look at the data format JSON looks exactly just like this. Okay, what you have here without this book's equal, right? But what's on the right-hand side of it is JSON format. So the reason why JSON is so popular is because, one, it is a web-driven product or byproduct of web development. They came up with JSON, they as in the consortium in the web about the probably like 12, 13, 14 years ago. So JSON became really popular all of a sudden. Before JSON, there's XML, right? There's text, there's binary. But they came out with JSON because JSON is serializable and deserializable into a JSON object in memory inside JavaScript. Serialization means try to convert your text data into binary. Deserialization means from binary into text. So a lot of times we use it to reference conversion of data from binary into a file, and from file, deconstruct them into a data text format. So there's a lot of these back and forth interoperability that goes on. And JSON is fast because it makes use of JavaScript object. It could quickly deserialize and serialize from JSON into JavaScript and vice versa. Okay. Anyway, I think we're going to have JSON in a little bit. I'm not sure if today or next week, but I just went through very quickly about the object and also the object literal. So object literal means constant. There is a value associated with this literal. This value is a constant. So usually you will have a constant like this, like right-hand side. This entire thing is hard-coded, so it's constant. It's already out there. So that's what I meant by object literal. In this case, book. Book has a literal, which is a value. This, okay, that is your literal right there. This literal is this guy right here. Okay, and book itself is a variable name that has this literal, and in a programming sense, literal is also constant, which means read only, cannot be changed. Okay. Like this. All right. What else? Yeah, go through these PA on your own and let me know if you have questions. Yeah, there's more objects. You can use a dot notation to dot into a object's key values pairs. So in this case, book is an object and book has a key called author. And this author has a value called Jack. Does it make sense? So this is literally object, key, value. Okay. And you can change the key. I mean, the key sometimes could be an author with a dot name. So in this case, the dot name would be an attribute inside this author object. So this is what I say, an object can have a whole bunch of objects, which can have a whole bunch of arrays, which can have a whole bunch of objects. You can nest and interoperable and build these things within the context of a single object. So this is a way you can kind of hide and nest a lot of information, very deeply inside your JavaScript using object. Okay. So object is like the most generic sense of the term in JavaScript where you can embed a lot of information. So just like your array, your object also has a whole lot of these properties or methods that you can invoke on. And the very first thing you see is, let's say this, hold on a second. Yeah, this get author name. This is defining a method of this particular function, and you can make use of the get author name to actually execute this. So this one is something that I don't use often myself. Yeah, so I never really had an experience using doing this. But as you can imagine, there's many ways to write certain things. You can also define the methods by saying, hey, this entire object is going to have a method, and this method is going to point to an anonymous function. This is an anonymous function, okay? There's no name associated with it. So literally, this anonymous function is a function expression with no parameters associated with it. And this entire thing is your book.get author name. Okay. What else? I'm just going to pick and choose what's the most important. So as assert methods means getter and setter. So this is read only and read write. So getter means read. Okay, you want to get something from it. So you return something, you read it, you don't change the underlying data. Setter is write. Okay, you are writing into something. So this is modifying some data. Setter always modifies stuff. You got to be very careful with the getter and setter. Actually, getter is innocuous. It won't change your underlying value. Getter is dangerous. Setter is dangerous because you can set a value inadvertently by mistake, and that will change the outcome of your function or your program in general if you do. Okay, so there is a getter and setter examples here. Again, I don't use a lot of set and get myself, but this is something new that you can use in ES6. What else? Yeah, this is all PAs. Now, you don't really reap the benefit of these PA unless you really do it. And it's totally okay, open book. You can search online, W3 School, for any tuitions, any help, but just don't copy someone. Just don't do this, right? Like what I'm doing right now is to kind of game the system and see, hey, this is wrong. Okay, yeah, this is great. And this without even looking into it. That will connote to no help. All right.
Professor, is this like an OP without encapsulation, which it seems to me like that, and also key value pairs inside?
This has nothing to do with object-oriented programming. This is just the properties of JavaScript. There is no encapsulation because everything is private. Everything is public. So you can using the dot operator to dot into its variables, its objects, its functions, so on and so forth in JavaScript. So everything is wide open. There is no data hiding at all. Make sense?
So everything is public, but
yeah.
you the dot for me is like I feel that it was instantiated instantiation or something like that.
No, that is not instantiation, but you do treat each object as an instance. So in that sense, yeah, you don't have to instantiate an instance by dynamically allocating space to it. Everything is kind of statically allocated. Now, whether this one uses heap or stack, whether this is dynamic memory allocation or static memory allocation, is being it's not exposed. The whole mechanism is not exposed to you. It's within JavaScript. So you can literally just create, like using this as an example, you can let music queue create this to essentially instantiate an instance of an object in JavaScript called music queue. And because this instance is already instantiated, instantiation means ascertaining memory at runtime to make sure there is a memory space associated with it. If this entire object has a memory space, that means it could be executed, it could be run, it could be evaluated, okay, at runtime. Otherwise, this object would have no life to it at all. So the fact that it is occupying memory and this music queue has it's a instantiated object. Instantiated object, you can dot into its behavior called next. So dot next. So next is either its attribute or behavior. In this case, is an attribute. It's just a variable inside music queue, and then you can assign a value to it.